Hi, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be doing the Nonfiction on Booktube tag. This tag was created by abookolive to make nonfiction booktubers a little bit more visible and to connect us. I think that it's a great tag. Pretty shortly after finding out about Booktube in general, I found this tag specifically when I was looking for more nonfiction books, and I found a lot of cool people to follow, so I thought that I would participate in it as well. So the first question that we have in this tag is, how much nonfiction do you read? I'd say the amount of nonfiction that I read definitely varies from year to year depending on my interests and my schooling. For instance, during my undergrad, I definitely read more fiction because that's what my degree called for. I was doing an English degree. When I was in grad school, I was reading way overwhelmingly nonfiction because that's what sociology called for. Now that I am no longer in school, though, I would say that about 40% of what I read is nonfiction. So, question number 2. What kind of nonfiction videos do you make or want to make on Booktube? So, there are some videos that nonfiction books would just end up being in, things like book hauls or TBRs or wrap-ups. But I am interested in doing reviews on nonfiction books, and I really like making recommendation list videos. I do have ideas for a couple of good ways to highlight nonfiction books, though. I like the idea of having recommendation lists by topic so that people can find books that they're interested in that way. Another way that I've incorporated nonfiction into a video, and I plan on doing more like this, is the if you've read this book, then read these books kind of format. So the video that I have up right now, I have The Symptoms of Being Human, which is a YA book about a non-binary person that is a pretty good book, but it is written by a cis person. So I took that, did a review for that, and then highlighted several books from across genres that were own voices books. And I think that in particular is going to be a really good way to encourage people to go out and branch out into other genres. I also really like the idea of making videos where I talk about a topic and how certain books fit into that topic. So it would be kind of similar to the book recommendations list, except it would be more kind of content and topic heavy than book recommendation heavy. So it would be educational content, but also kind of promoting the books. And if any of those sort of videos sound interesting to you, let me know in the comments. If there's any specific topic that you're interested in that's related to sociology, let me know. Most of my studies were focused on LGBT related things, but as a sociologist, I'm also familiar and read in other areas as well. So next question, number 3. Favorite subgenre of nonfiction? This is sort of difficult because what all subgenres of nonfiction are there? You could break it up by topic if you wanted to, or if you wanted to break it up by format somehow. I don't really know. I mean, I study sociology, so I love the social science books. I also really like books on feminism and feminist theory, and that's definitely related to social sciences. It's just kind of a specific topic within that. But I also really love memoirs. I love being able to look into other people's experiences. I get a lot from that. I really like books that take pieces of memoir and pieces of social science and talk about living the experience, but with kind of that social background. I think that you see that definitely in some feminist-oriented books. Trans Like Me by C.N. Lester is one that does that. In general, the reason that I like memoirs is because I feel like it can inform some of what I already know about society with the stuff that I've studied, but when they're kind of doing that all together, it's a whole other experience, and I really enjoy that. So, question number 4. Do you have a favorite nonfiction book? Well, I'm not very good at picking favorites. If you ask me to pick a favorite, I usually give a top 3 or a top 5 or just a random one that I like. So to answer that question, I'm going to talk about 4 different books. So the first book I would say is a favorite, partly because of the impact that it made on me. And that is Making History, The Struggle for Gay and Lesbian Equal Rights by Eric Marcus. This is a collection of oral histories from gay activists from 1945 to 1990. And I read this book, I think towards the end of my undergraduate degree. And I was already thinking that I knew that I wanted to work with the LGBT community, or at least it was of interest to me. I was in the GSA and I was making educational materials and things like that or starting to do all of that. But this really played a role in solidifying that that is the community that I wanted to work with and help. So this book is really important to me in that regard, but also I really, really value oral histories. I think that that's one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to memoir, because somebody can look at history and tell you what happened, but these people can tell you what happened to them. I don't know, it's just really important to me. The next book that I'm going to talk about is well written and thorough, and just an incredibly important book if you're interested in sociology or policy of anything regarding the United States. And that is The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration, the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. I read this for a class in grad school, but it is an absolutely phenomenal book. Really, honestly, I think that everyone who deals with people in the United States should read this book for understanding, but I understand that not everyone is going to go out and do that. But at the very least, if you have an interest at all in race or policy or sociology, you need to read this book. It's so well done, and the topic is just incredibly important and really often neglected in general history classes. The next nonfiction book that I really, really love is Colonize This, Young Women of Color in Today's Feminism, edited by Daisy Hernandez and Bushra Rehman. This is a collection of essays from a variety of different people, like it says, kind of on the state of feminism, but they talk about family, immigration, culture, reproductive rights. They go through a whole lot of different things from a lot of different perspectives. This is just an incredibly valuable set of essays. I also think that it's really accessible. So if you're interested in feminism in any capacity, definitely check this out, because there is stuff that you can read, even if you're not high academic or whatever. They're really manageable chunks since it is an essay book. You can even just go through and start off just reading the ones you're interested in. There's a lot of important stuff in here. And my final favorite that I wanted to talk about is probably the one that's most accessible. So if you aren't really used to reading nonfiction, this could be a starting point for you. And that is Sorted, Growing Up, Coming Out, and Finding My Place by Jackson Bird. This is a memoir, but he also integrates education into it. It's not exactly like the ones that I described before where you had like theory and social science data interweaved with memoir. This one is definitely 100% a memoir, but he has these asides that he incorporates in order to educate people on the topic. So this is an absolutely wonderful book for people who might not know a whole lot about the topic. A great beginner's book, but it's also good for people who are pretty well versed but just want other perspectives, or to have something to give to somebody else or to point out to somebody else. I just think it's a really valuable resource, and I really love like the actual flow of the memoir. I'm a big fan of Jackson Bird kind of in general, just before this was even out anyways, but this is another one of my favorites. So moving on, question number 5 is, what do you think keeps people from reading nonfiction? I think that one of the big things that keeps people from reading nonfiction is the same thing that keeps people from reading in general, and that is how they treat books and reading in school. Nobody wants to read assigned reading for their classes. At least with the fiction, there are going to be some that are good, even if you're kind of resistant, and even if a lot of them are kind of bad, especially when you don't want to read them. But the only nonfiction that you really get to read is in a textbook, and it's usually not very engaging and not really good. So I think that really puts a nasty taste in people's mouths. Question number 6. Why do you like nonfiction? I like learning about other people's experiences. In general, understanding the way that humans work is something that's really important to me. It's really valuable. I like understanding the world around me and the people around me and how I can best help them. And I think that in order to know how to help someone, you have to listen to them first. Even if you don't understand, like, on an integral level, like, I felt what you're feeling, you can still cognitively understand the needs that they have, and different things like that. And fiction definitely does a lot to add to that, or at least the fiction books that I like to read add to that. And the nonfiction books do too. They both have different roles in it, and they just achieve those things in different ways. And I find the way that nonfiction does that as very valuable. Question number 7. What is a nonfiction book that you have read because of Booktube? I've got to say, there are more books that I have bought because of Booktube than ones that I have read, but I've only known about Booktube since January. But even still, I do have, well, I technically have 2, but the other one is an answer to the next question. The first one that I'm going to talk about is technically nonfiction, because it's not about events that are false or are made up. It's about real life experience, but it is poetry. I feel like putting poetry in nonfiction might not be technically correct, but I'm gonna go with this one. That's Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith. In this, Danez talks about their experience being Black, but also being in a Black community, what they experience on that level too, and they sort of integrate their own personal experience with the experiences of the people that are around them. So even though this is told poetically and there aren't going to be a lot of like hardcore academic things happening, they are still hitting on a lot of stuff that goes on in other nonfiction books. This book absolutely blew me away. I mean, the topics that they hit on are really important, but just the emotion that's in this, the way that they write is just wonderful. I am super excited for April because it's National Poetry Month, I think. I'm planning on reading a lot of poetry then, and I have Homie sitting on my bookshelf that's also by Danez Smith. This was an incredible set of poetry, and I highly recommend it. If you aren't super into nonfiction, it's good because I think that poetry is maybe a little bit easier to digest in some ways. I think there's more emotional factors, so it depends on how you digest things. If you are used to reading a lot of nonfiction, you should read this, because I think that things like poetry can contextualize the things that we learn in some of the heavier nonfiction books in a really, really special way. Question number 8 is, what's the best nonfiction book that you have read lately? In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. I had so many feelings reading this book, and it was so interesting. It incorporates a lot of different, literarily interesting things. Most of it is written in second person, and it's a memoir, so a lot of it's very much focused on the things that they experienced, and you sort of get to experience that with them. You experience this abusive relationship, kind of what it was like starting out, and then kind of the feeling of it getting worse, but also, you know, the complicated emotions that come sort of with that. Alongside kind of this experience, though, there are also some chapters that are written in first person, where she talks about other instances of spousal abuse in queer relationships, and the fact that it's just not talked about as much. Even though these women have written about it before, they get ignored. Lesbian victims of domestic violence get totally ignored in the courts and things like that too. This book is incredibly important and incredibly interesting. If you are used to fiction, especially if you're used to like maybe horror or horror-oriented things, this could definitely be a good step into nonfiction. So the next question we have, number 9, what are some of your nonfiction goals? In general, my TBRs are sort of ever-changing. However, I do have some topics that I would want to focus on. Over the past year and a half or so, I've been looking at books about racial justice. I want to continue that. I've been looking more at prisons and different things like that relates. But I also, kind of as another thing, would like to look at the HIV and AIDS epidemic. That's not something that I'm super familiar with, and I really would like to be more familiar with, especially as someone who does research with the LGBT community. I think in general there's a lot of overlap between HIV and AIDS activism and some of the places that racial justice goes. If you look at the statistics for the United States, there's a very clear need for HIV activism in communities of color, but also looking at the prison system and kind of who gets criminalized. There's also a good overlap there. So I'm really interested in looking at those two topics. Of course, there's other stuff that I want to read too, but those are the two things that I've been, I think, looking at the most. So, question number 10, advice for incorporating more nonfiction into your reading diet. In general, I think you should read topics that you're interested in. If you hear people recommend books and they're really hyped about them, but you honestly have zero interest in whatever that is, of course, maybe read it and it might surprise you, but if you're really looking to dig into it, go to a topic that you really like or a topic that is really important to you. I think that another good way to do this, I mentioned this earlier, is to match it with fiction that you're interested in. So if you're reading a fiction book that's set in a specific country and you really like a lot of those little details that they have, then maybe pick out a book that's about that location or about someone who's important in that location. Or if there's a character from historical fiction that you're interested in, maybe pick up a nonfiction book from that same era. There are a lot of different ways that you can do it, but that would be my advice. And then there is a bonus question here, which is to recommend nonfiction booktubers. I had a couple who came to mind initially. Brianna's Library is one of the first nonfiction booktubers that I found and I really, really loved. A lot of the videos of theirs that I've seen deal a lot with politics and race, so I'm really interested in those. I think they study political science, so a lot of those books are more heavy political than ones that I have read, but I'm super interested in getting and reading a number of the books that they've recommended. And in general, I really enjoy hearing what they have to say about the books that they get. The next person that I thought of was Ghost Reader. He kind of looks at a variety of different topics. I like his reviews. The books that he reads are interesting. So I would recommend him as well. So that is the Nonfiction Booktuber tag. Let me know in the comments what your favorite nonfiction book is. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye!